Welcome, dear listener, to the extraordinary story of Leonardo da Vinci, a man whose boundless curiosity and creative genius embodied the highest aspirations of human achievement and whose legacy continues to inspire artists, scientists, and dreamers more than 5 centuries after his death. Tonight, we journey through the remarkable life of history's greatest polymath, a man who saw no boundaries between art and science, between beauty and truth, between the workings of the human heart and the mechanics of flowing water. As you settle into your comfortable position, allow your breathing to slow and deepen, like the gentle rhythm of a painter's brush moving across canvas, creating beauty with each deliberate stroke. Feel the tensions of the modern world fade away, replaced by the timeless wonder of a mind that saw connections where others saw only separate phenomena, that found patterns in nature that revealed the underlying harmony of all creation. Close your eyes and imagine yourself in Leonardo's workshop in Renaissance Florence, surrounded by half-finished paintings, anatomical drawings, mechanical designs, and notebooks filled with mirror writing that captured the endless flow of his observations and ideas. The afternoon light streams through tall windows, illuminating the face of a man whose penetrating gaze seemed to see through the surface of things to their essential nature, whose hands could create both the sublime beauty of the Mona Lisa and the precise engineering of flying machines that would not be built for centuries. We will follow Leonardo's journey from his birth in the small Tuscan town of Vinci to his final years in the Chateau of France, a life that spanned the transformation of Europe from the medieval world to the modern age, and that helped define what we mean by Renaissance humanism. We will witness his evolution from an illegitimate child with few prospects to the most celebrated artist and inventor of his time. A man whose notebooks contained the seeds of discoveries that would not be fully understood until the age of flight and space exploration. Let your mind drift, like the sfumato technique that Leonardo perfected, where colors and forms blend imperceptibly into one another, creating an atmosphere of mystery and depth that captures something essential about the nature of reality itself. We will explore the workshops of Florence, where he learnt the fundamentals of his craft, the courts of Milan and France, where he served as artist, engineer, and entertainer, and the quiet moments of solitude where he pursued his investigations into the secrets of anatomy, geology, and the flight of birds. Tonight, we will discover the paradoxes of this remarkable man, the artist who created some of the world's most beautiful paintings while leaving many of them unfinished, the scientist who made groundbreaking discoveries in anatomy and engineering while working centuries before the scientific method was formally established, the inventor who designed machines that would not be built until the industrial age, while living in a world powered by muscle, wind, and water. We will examine how his artistic vision informed his scientific investigations, and how his scientific understanding deepened his artistic expression. This is the story of a man who believed that learning never exhausts the mind, that obstacles cannot crush those who have the courage to persist, and that the eye, which is called the window of the soul, is the principal means by which understanding may most fully appreciate the infinite works of nature. As we journey through Leonardo's remarkable life, let the story wash over you like the gentle flow of the Arno River past the hills of Tuscany, carrying you peacefully toward the shores of sleep, while enriching your understanding of what it means to live a life of creative curiosity and boundless imagination. Chapter 1: Child of Nature, 1452–1466. Our story begins on April 15, 1452, in the small hilltop town of Vinci, nestled among the olive groves and vineyards of the Tuscan countryside, where Leonardo da Vinci was born into a world that was poised between the fading medieval age and the dawning Renaissance. The landscape of his birth was one of extraordinary beauty, where rolling hills covered with cypress trees and ancient stone farmhouses created a harmony between human habitation and natural splendor that would profoundly influence his artistic vision throughout his life. Picture, if you will, the Tuscany of Leonardo's childhood, a land where every vista seemed composed by a master painter, where the quality of light changed throughout the day to reveal new aspects of familiar landscapes, where the relationship between human beings and the natural world was intimate and immediate. The town of Vinci itself was a modest place, dominated by a medieval castle and surrounded by terraced hillsides, where peasants cultivated grapes and olives using methods that had remained unchanged for centuries. Leonardo's father, Ser Piero da Vinci, was a notary who served the local nobility and merchant families, a man of education and social standing who represented the emerging professional class that was transforming Italian society during the Renaissance. His work required him to travel frequently between Vinci and Florence, exposing him to the intellectual and artistic currents that were revolutionizing Italian culture, while his legal training gave him an appreciation for precision, documentation, and logical argument that he would pass on to his son. Leonardo's mother, Caterina, was a peasant woman whose relationship with Ser Piero was brief and informal, reflecting the social realities of a time when illegitimate children were common and not necessarily stigmatized, particularly if their fathers acknowledged them and provided for their upbringing. While little is known about Caterina's background or personality, her influence on Leonardo's character may have been profound, instilling in him a love of nature and an appreciation for the wisdom of ordinary people that would distinguish him from many of his more aristocratic contemporaries. The circumstances of Leonardo's birth as an illegitimate child might have limited his opportunities in a more rigid society, but the relatively fluid social structure of Renaissance Italy, combined with his father's recognition and support, allowed him to receive an education and pursue a career that would have been impossible in earlier centuries. His status as a natural child may have actually contributed to his development as an independent thinker, free from some of the conventional expectations that constrained legitimate heirs and more inclined to question established authorities and traditional ways of thinking. Picture young Leonardo in the countryside around Vinci, a curious child with penetrating eyes and an insatiable desire to understand how things worked, spending hours observing the flight of birds, the flow of water in streams, and the growth of plants in the fields and forests. His earliest education came not from books, but from direct observation of the natural world. As he developed the habit of careful attention to detail that would characterize all of his later work, whether in art, science, or engineering, Leonardo's formal education was limited by the standards of his time, as illegitimate children were generally excluded from the universities and professional schools that trained lawyers, physicians, and clergy. He learned to read and write in Italian, acquired basic arithmetic skills, and may have received some instruction in Latin, but he never mastered the classical languages that were considered essential for scholarly pursuits. This limitation, which he later described as making him an homo senza lettere, man without letters, may have been a blessing in disguise, as it forced him to rely on direct observation and experimentation, rather than on the authority of ancient texts. The young Leonardo's relationship with his stepmother, Albiera, who married Ser Piero when Leonardo was 4 years old, provided him with the stable family environment that his irregular birth circumstances might otherwise have denied him. Albiera was a kind and intelligent woman who treated Leonardo as her own son and encouraged his artistic interests, recognizing his exceptional talents even when they manifested in ways that seemed impractical or unconventional to others. Leonardo's first encounters with art and craftsmanship came through his observations of the local artisans who worked in and around Vinci, including stonemasons, carpenters, and metal workers, whose skills were essential to the agricultural and domestic life of the community. He was fascinated by the tools and techniques these craftsmen used, and he began to understand that human creativity could transform raw materials into objects of both utility and beauty. This early exposure to practical craftsmanship would later inform his approach to both artistic creation and mechanical invention. Picture Leonardo as a young teenager, already showing signs of the extraordinary observational powers that would make him one of history's greatest students of nature, spending long hours sketching the plants and animals he encountered in the Tuscan countryside, while developing the drawing skills that would become the foundation of all his later achievements. His notebooks from this period, if they had survived, would probably have revealed a mind already beginning to see the connections between seemingly unrelated phenomena, already asking the kinds of questions that would drive his lifelong quest for understanding. The decision to apprentice Leonardo to Andrea del Verrocchio in Florence was made when he was about 14 years old, reflecting both his father's recognition of his artistic talents and the practical necessity of providing him with a trade that could support him throughout his life. The choice of Verrocchio was particularly fortunate, as his workshop was one of the most prestigious in Florence and attracted students who would become some of the greatest artists of the Renaissance, including Botticelli, Perugino, and Lorenzo di Credi. Leonardo's departure from Vinci for Florence in 1466 marked the end of his childhood and the beginning of his transformation from a curious country boy into one of the most accomplished artists and thinkers of his age. The journey from the quiet hills of Tuscany to the bustling streets of Florence was more than a geographical transition. It was a passage from the medieval world of his birth to the Renaissance world, that would nurture his genius and provide him with the opportunities to develop his extraordinary talents. Picture Leonardo on his final day in Vinci, standing on the hillside above his birthplace as he looked out over the landscape that had shaped his earliest understanding of beauty and natural harmony, knowing that he was about to enter a larger world where his talents would be tested and refined, but also knowing that he would carry with him forever the love of nature and the habit of careful observation that his childhood in the Tuscan countryside had instilled in him. As you continue to relax and drift towards sleep, imagine the young Leonardo walking down the hill from Vinci toward the road that would take him to Florence, his few possessions in a simple bundle, his mind already filled with questions and ideas that would occupy him for the rest of his life. He was 14 years old, a young man with extraordinary gifts, but no way of knowing that he would become one of the most celebrated figures in human history, that his name would become synonymous with genius itself, and that his legacy would inspire countless generations of artists, scientists, and inventors to push the boundaries of human knowledge and creative expression. Chapter 2: Apprentice in Florence, 1466 to 1476. Leonardo's arrival in Florence in 1466 marked his entry into one of the most vibrant and creative cities in the world, a place where art, commerce, and intellectual inquiry flourished under the patronage of wealthy merchants and the enlightened rule of the Medici family. Florence was the beating heart of the Renaissance, where ancient Greek and Roman texts were being rediscovered and translated, where artists were developing new techniques for representing the natural world, and where humanist philosophers were articulating new ideas about human dignity and potential. Picture Leonardo walking through the streets of Florence for the first time, a 14-year-old boy from the countryside, overwhelmed by the sights, sounds, and smells of a great city. The magnificent cathedral, with Brunelleschi's revolutionary dome rising above the red-tiled rooftops, the bustling markets where merchants from across Europe and the Mediterranean traded in silk, spices, and precious metals, and the workshops where artists and craftsmen created objects of extraordinary beauty and technical sophistication. The workshop of Andrea del Verrocchio, where Leonardo began his apprenticeship, was located in the heart of Florence's artisan quarter, a neighborhood where the sounds of hammering, sawing, and grinding filled the air as dozens of workshops produced everything from fine jewelry and religious sculptures to architectural ornaments and military equipment. Verrocchio's bottega was one of the most prestigious in the city, known for the high quality of its work and the comprehensive training it provided to young artists in all aspects of their craft. Andrea del Verrocchio himself was a master of extraordinary versatility, skilled in painting, sculpture, goldsmithing, and engineering, who embodied the Renaissance ideal of the complete artist-craftsman. His approach to teaching emphasized careful observation of nature, mastery of drawing as the foundation of all visual arts, and understanding of the mathematical principles that governed perspective, proportion, and architectural design. Under his guidance, Leonardo would learn not only the technical skills of painting and sculpture, but also the intellectual framework that would inform all of his later investigations. Picture Leonardo in his first days at Verrocchio's workshop, observing the master and his senior apprentices as they worked on commissions for churches, private patrons, and civic institutions, learning the complex processes involved in creating works of art from initial conception through final execution. The workshop was a hive of activity where apprentices ground pigments, prepared canvases, carved wooden panels, and cast bronze sculptures, while gradually acquiring the skills that would allow them to contribute to major projects and eventually establish workshops of their own. Leonardo's exceptional drawing ability was apparent from the beginning of his apprenticeship, as he demonstrated a natural talent for capturing not only the external appearance of objects but also their essential character and inner life. His early drawings reveal a mind that was already beginning to see beyond surface appearances to the underlying structures and forces that gave form and movement to the natural world. Whether he was sketching the drapery of a figure, the anatomy of a flower, or the play of light and shadow on a human face. The artistic environment of Verrocchio's workshop exposed Leonardo to the latest developments in Renaissance art, including the use of oil painting techniques imported from Flanders, the application of mathematical perspective to create convincing illusions of three-dimensional space, and the study of classical sculpture and architecture that was transforming Italian artistic style. These innovations were not merely technical improvements, but represented a fundamental shift in how artists understood their role and their relationship to the natural world. Leonardo's collaboration with Verrocchio on the painting The Baptism of Christ, around 1472 to 1475, marked his emergence as an artist of exceptional promise and demonstrated the distinctive qualities that would characterize all of his mature work. According to tradition, Leonardo painted one of the angels in the composition, and his contribution was so superior to the rest of the painting that Verrocchio supposedly never painted again, recognizing that his student had surpassed him. While this story may be apocryphal, the angel attributed to Leonardo does indeed show a softness, naturalism, and psychological depth that distinguish it from the more conventional figures painted by Verrocchio. Picture Leonardo working on his angel in The Baptism of Christ, using the new oil painting techniques to create subtle gradations of color and tone that gave his figure a lifelike quality that seemed almost miraculous to contemporary observers. His approach to painting was already showing the characteristics that would make him one of the greatest artists in history. Meticulous attention to detail, profound understanding of human anatomy and psychology, and an ability to capture not just the external appearance of his subjects, but their inner essence. Leonardo's studies in anatomy began during his apprenticeship, as he sought to understand the structure of the human body in order to represent it more accurately in his art. His dissections of corpses, conducted in secret and at considerable personal risk, revealed to him the incredible complexity and beauty of human anatomy, while also raising profound questions about the relationship between the physical body and the soul, between the mechanical processes of life and the mystery of consciousness. The intellectual atmosphere of Florence during Leonardo's apprenticeship was extraordinarily stimulating, as humanist scholars, artists, and natural philosophers gathered in the Medici Palace and other centers of learning to discuss the latest ideas about art, science, and human nature. Leonardo, though still a young apprentice, was exposed to these discussions and began to develop the philosophical framework that would guide his lifelong quest for knowledge and understanding. Leonardo's fascination with engineering and mechanical devices also began during his apprenticeship, as he observed the various machines and tools used in Verrocchio's workshop and began to understand the principles of mechanics, hydraulics, and structural engineering that governed their operation. His notebooks from this period contain sketches of pulleys, gears, and other mechanical devices, along with his first attempts to design improvements and innovations that would make these machines more efficient and effective. Picture Leonardo in the evenings after the workshop had closed, working by candlelight on his own projects and investigations, filling page after page of his notebooks with observations, sketches, and ideas that ranged from artistic techniques to mechanical inventions to philosophical speculations about the nature of reality. His habit of mirror writing, which he developed during this period, may have been partly a practical measure to prevent others from easily reading his notes, but it also reflected his left-handedness and his tendency to approach problems from unconventional angles. Leonardo's completion of his apprenticeship around 1476 and his admission to the Guild of St. Luke as an independent master marked his transition from student to professional artist. But it also represented the beginning of a period of uncertainty and experimentation as he sought to establish his own artistic identity and find patrons who would support his work. The Florence of the 1470s was highly competitive, with many talented artists competing for a limited number of commissions, and Leonardo's unconventional approach and perfectionist tendencies sometimes made it difficult for him to complete projects on schedule. The mysterious circumstances surrounding Leonardo's brief imprisonment in 1476 on charges of sodomy, which were later dropped, may have contributed to his decision to leave Florence and seek opportunities elsewhere. While the details of this incident remain unclear, it appears to have been part of a broader pattern of accusations against young artists and intellectuals that reflected the social tensions and moral anxieties of Renaissance society. Leonardo's decision to remain in Florence for several more years after completing his apprenticeship allowed him to develop his distinctive artistic style and to begin the scientific investigations that would occupy him throughout his life. His painting of the Annunciation, probably completed around 1472 to 1475, shows his mastery of the techniques he had learned from Verrocchio, while also revealing his own unique approach to composition, color, and the representation of natural phenomena. Picture Leonardo in his own workshop during the late 1470s, a young master artist surrounded by his own apprentices and assistants as he worked on commissions while continuing his investigations into anatomy, engineering, and natural philosophy. He was approaching 30 years old, an artist of recognized talent, but not yet the legendary figure he would become, still searching for the perfect synthesis of art and science that would define his mature work and establish his reputation as one of the greatest minds in human history. As you continue your peaceful journey towards sleep, imagine Leonardo on a quiet evening in Florence, standing on the Ponte Vecchio as he watched the Arno River flow beneath the ancient bridge, his mind already turning toward the new challenges and opportunities that awaited him beyond the familiar streets and workshops of his apprenticeship. The young man who had arrived from Vinci as a curious country boy had become a master artist and natural philosopher, ready to embark on the next phase of his extraordinary journey of discovery and creation. Chapter 3: The Milanese Years, 1482 to 1499. Leonardo's departure from Florence for Milan in 1482 marked the beginning of the most productive and innovative period of his career, as he entered the service of Ludovico Sforza, Duke of Milan, and found in the cosmopolitan court of northern Italy the perfect environment for his diverse talents and interests. Milan was one of the wealthiest and most powerful cities in Europe, a center of commerce, manufacturing, and military innovation, where Leonardo would have the resources and freedom to pursue projects that ranged from monumental works of art to revolutionary engineering designs. Picture Leonardo's arrival in Milan on a crisp autumn day in 1482, traveling with his small entourage through the fertile plains of Lombardy as the city's impressive fortifications and the soaring spires of its Gothic cathedral came into view. Milan was a city of contrasts, where medieval traditions coexisted with Renaissance innovations, where the practical concerns of commerce and warfare were balanced by a sophisticated appreciation for art and learning, and where a young artist-engineer could find patrons willing to support the most ambitious and unconventional projects. Leonardo's letter of introduction to Ludovico Sforza, which he may have written himself, reveals the breadth of his ambitions and the confidence with which he approached his new patron. Rather than emphasizing his achievements as a painter, Leonardo presented himself primarily as a military engineer and inventor, claiming expertise in the design of bridges, siege engines, armored vehicles, and fortifications, while mentioning his artistic abilities almost as an afterthought. This strategic self-presentation reflected his understanding that Ludovico was more interested in practical applications of knowledge than in purely aesthetic achievements. The court of Ludovico Sforza was one of the most brilliant in Europe, attracting scholars, artists, musicians, and diplomats from across the continent who gathered to participate in the intellectual and cultural life of Renaissance Italy. Leonardo found himself in the company of humanist philosophers, mathematicians, architects, and natural philosophers who shared his curiosity about the workings of the natural world and his belief that human knowledge could be advanced through careful observation and systematic investigation. Picture Leonardo in his workshop at the Corte Vecchia, the old ducal palace where Ludovico had provided him with space to work on his various projects, surrounded by paintings in progress, mechanical models, anatomical drawings, and the notebooks in which he recorded his endless observations and ideas. The workshop was a laboratory where art and science converged, where aesthetic beauty and practical utility were pursued with equal passion, and where the boundaries between different fields of knowledge were constantly being crossed and recrossed. Leonardo's work on the Last Supper for the refectory of the convent of Santa Maria delle Grazie represents the culmination of his artistic achievement during the Milanese years and demonstrates his revolutionary approach to religious painting. Rather than depicting the traditional moment of the institution of the Eucharist, Leonardo chose to represent the dramatic instant when Christ announces that one of his disciples will betray him, creating a composition of extraordinary psychological complexity and emotional intensity. The technical innovations that Leonardo employed in The Last Supper were as revolutionary as its artistic conception, as he experimented with new painting techniques that would allow him to work more slowly and deliberately than traditional fresco methods permitted. His use of tempera and oil on a dry wall, while ultimately proving less durable than conventional fresco, allowed him to achieve effects of light, shadow, and detail that would have been impossible with traditional techniques. Picture Leonardo working on The Last Supper over the course of several years, climbing scaffolding each day to add minute details to the faces and gestures of the apostles, studying the play of light through the windows of the refectory to understand how natural illumination would interact with his painted composition, and constantly revising and refining his work as his understanding of the scene's psychological and spiritual dimensions deepened. Leonardo's scientific investigations during his Milanese years were as groundbreaking as his artistic achievements, as he conducted systematic studies of human anatomy, hydraulic engineering, mechanical devices, and natural phenomena that laid the foundation for many of the discoveries that would not be fully understood until centuries later. His anatomical drawings from this period reveal an understanding of human physiology that was far in advance of contemporary medical knowledge, while his engineering designs anticipated many of the machines that would power the Industrial Revolution. The notebooks that Leonardo filled during his years in Milan contain some of the most remarkable documents in the history of human thought, combining artistic sketches, scientific observations, engineering designs, and philosophical reflections in a unique synthesis that reflects the unity of his approach to knowledge. His habit of mirror writing, his use of detailed drawings to supplement verbal descriptions, and his constant cross-referencing between different fields of study created a personal encyclopedia that captured the full range of his intellectual interests. Leonardo's work as a court entertainer and designer of theatrical spectacles revealed another dimension of his genius, as he created elaborate mechanical devices and stage effects for the festivals and celebrations that were an important part of Renaissance court life. His designs for costumes, sets, and special effects demonstrated his understanding of optics, mechanics, and human psychology, while also providing him with opportunities to experiment with ideas that would later find application in his more serious artistic and scientific work. Picture Leonardo during one of the court festivals, directing the operation of mechanical lions that walked across the stage and opened their chests to reveal bouquets of lilies, or supervising the complex system of pulleys and counterweights that allowed actors to fly through the air as gods and angels. These entertainments were more than mere diversions. They were laboratories where Leonardo could test his ideas about motion, force, and the relationship between art and technology. Leonardo's studies of water flow and hydraulic engineering during his Milanese years led to some of his most important scientific insights, as he observed the behavior of fluids in motion and began to understand the principles that govern everything from the circulation of blood in the human body to the formation of rivers and the erosion of mountains. His designs for canals, locks, and irrigation systems demonstrated practical applications of his theoretical understanding, while his artistic representations of water in motion captured the beauty and power of natural forces. The equestrian monument that Leonardo designed to honor Francesco Sforza, Ludovico's father, would have been the largest bronze sculpture ever created and represented one of his most ambitious projects during the Milanese years. His studies for the monument reveal his deep understanding of equine anatomy and movement, while his engineering calculations for the casting process demonstrate his mastery of metallurgy and structural mechanics. Although the monument was never completed due to political and financial difficulties, the preparatory work that Leonardo did for it advanced his understanding of sculpture, engineering, and the relationship between art and technology. Picture Leonardo in the courtyard of the Sforza castle, studying the movements of horses as he prepared his designs for the monument, making countless sketches of equine anatomy and experimenting with different poses and compositions that would capture the power and nobility of both horse and rider. His approach to the project was characteristically thorough, as he investigated every aspect of the technical and artistic challenges involved in creating a work of unprecedented scale and complexity. Leonardo's friendships with other intellectuals at the Milanese court, including the mathematician Luca Pacioli and the architect Donato Bramante, provided him with intellectual companionship and collaborative opportunities that enriched his understanding of mathematics, geometry, and architectural design. These relationships were particularly important for Leonardo, whose unconventional background and self-taught approach to learning sometimes isolated him from the academic establishment of his time. The political upheavals that led to the fall of Ludovico Sforza in 1499 and the French occupation of Milan brought Leonardo's productive years at the Milanese court to an abrupt end, forcing him to seek new patrons and opportunities while leaving behind many unfinished projects and unrealized ambitions. His departure from Milan was both a personal loss and a historical tragedy, as it scattered the remarkable collection of artists, scholars, and inventors who had gathered around Ludovico's court and brought to an end one of the most creative periods in Renaissance history. Picture Leonardo on his final day in Milan, packing his notebooks, drawings, and personal possessions, while French soldiers occupied the city and the world he had known for 17 years crumbled around him. He was 47 years old, an artist and inventor of international reputation, but also a man without a permanent home or secure patronage, facing an uncertain future as he prepared to begin the next chapter of his extraordinary life. As you drift deeper into peaceful slumber, imagine Leonardo traveling south from Milan through the Italian countryside, his mind already turning toward new projects and possibilities, while carrying with him the knowledge and experience he had gained during his years at one of Europe's most brilliant courts. The artist who had created The Last Supper and designed flying machines was about to enter the final phase of his career, where he would create his most famous masterpiece and continue his quest to understand the fundamental principles that govern both artistic beauty and natural phenomena. Chapter 4: The Wandering Master, 1500 to 1519. Leonardo's departure from Milan in 1499 marked the beginning of nearly 2 decades of wandering as he moved between the courts and cities of Renaissance Italy and France, seeking patrons who would support his work while continuing his investigations into the mysteries of art, science, and human nature. This period of his life was characterized by both remarkable achievements and profound frustrations, as he created some of his most famous works while struggling with the practical challenges of completing projects and maintaining financial security. Picture Leonardo in the early months of 1500, traveling through the war-torn landscape of northern Italy as French and Italian armies contested control of the region, carrying with him the precious notebooks and drawings that contained the accumulated wisdom of his years in Milan. He was approaching 50 years of age, an artist of international reputation, but also a man without a permanent home, seeking a new patron who would appreciate his unique combination of artistic genius and scientific curiosity. Leonardo's brief return to Florence in 1500 brought him back to the city where he had learned his craft. But he found a very different place from the one he had left nearly 20 years earlier. The Florence of 1500 was a republic struggling to maintain its independence against more powerful neighbors, while the artistic community had been transformed by the emergence of younger masters like Michelangelo, who represented a new generation of artists with different approaches to their craft and different relationships with their patrons. The commission for the Battle of Anghiari in the Palazzo Vecchio provided Leonardo with the opportunity to create what might have been his greatest work, a monumental fresco depicting a famous Florentine military victory that would have demonstrated his mastery of composition, movement, and psychological drama on an unprecedented scale. His preparatory drawings for the battle scene reveal his deep understanding of human and equine anatomy, his ability to capture the chaos and violence of combat, and his skill in organizing complex multi-figure compositions. Picture Leonardo working on the cartoon for the Battle of Anghiari, creating a full-scale drawing that served as the template for the fresco, and that became famous in its own right as a masterpiece of draftsmanship and artistic conception. The cartoon showed the climactic moment of the battle, with warriors and horses locked in desperate combat, their faces distorted by rage and fear, their bodies twisted by the violence of their struggle, all rendered with Leonardo's characteristic attention to anatomical accuracy and psychological truth. The technical problems that plagued Leonardo's work on the Battle of Anghiari reflected his lifelong tendency to experiment with new materials and techniques, often with disastrous results. His attempt to use an encaustic technique based on ancient Roman methods led to the partial destruction of the fresco when the wax-based paint began to run and blur, forcing him to abandon the project and leaving only fragments of what might have been his greatest public work. Leonardo's creation of the Mona Lisa during this period represents the culmination of his artistic achievement and demonstrates his mastery of the painting techniques he had developed over decades of experimentation and refinement. The portrait of Lisa Gherardini, wife of a Florentine merchant, became the most famous painting in the world through Leonardo's revolutionary approach to portraiture, his use of sfumato to create atmospheric effects, and his ability to capture something essential about human psychology and emotion. Picture Leonardo in his workshop as he worked on the Mona Lisa, spending years perfecting every detail of the composition, studying the play of light on his subject's face, experimenting with different techniques for rendering the transparency of skin and the texture of fabric, and gradually developing the mysterious smile that has fascinated viewers for more than 5 centuries. His approach to the painting was characteristically methodical and scientific, as he applied his knowledge of anatomy, optics, and psychology to create a work of art that transcended mere representation to become a meditation on the nature of human consciousness. Leonardo's anatomical studies during this period reached new levels of sophistication and accuracy as he gained access to corpses for dissection and began to create detailed drawings of human organs, muscles, and skeletal structures that would not be surpassed in accuracy until the development of modern medical illustration. His investigations into the structure of the heart, the function of the nervous system, and the mechanics of human movement were centuries ahead of their time and demonstrated his ability to combine artistic skill with scientific methodology. The notebooks that Leonardo filled during his wandering years contain some of his most profound observations about the natural world, including his studies of water flow, cloud formation, plant growth, and geological processes that revealed his understanding of the dynamic forces that shape the Earth's surface. His drawings of the deluge, which show the Earth being reshaped by catastrophic floods, demonstrate both his scientific understanding of natural processes and his artistic ability to represent forces and movements that are normally invisible to human observation. Picture Leonardo during his stay in Rome from 1513 to 1516, working in the Vatican under the patronage of Pope Leo X, while surrounded by younger artists like Michelangelo and Raphael, who were creating some of the greatest masterpieces of Renaissance art. His position in Rome was somewhat marginal, as his reputation as a slow worker and his interest in scientific investigations made him less attractive to patrons who wanted quick results and conventional religious subjects. Leonardo's scientific investigations during his Roman years included studies of mirrors and optical devices, experiments with mechanical automata, and continued work on his anatomical drawings. Though his dissection activities were curtailed by church authorities, who were suspicious of his methods and motivations. His notebooks from this period reveal a growing interest in theoretical questions about the nature of force, motion, and the mathematical principles that govern natural phenomena. The invitation from King Francis I of France to join the French court at Amboise in 1516 provided Leonardo with the recognition and security that had often eluded him during his career, as the young king offered him a generous pension and complete freedom to pursue his investigations without the pressure to produce specific works for specific patrons. Francis I's appreciation for Leonardo's genius was both personal and political, as the king sought to enhance the prestige of his court by attracting the most celebrated artists and intellectuals of his time. Picture Leonardo's arrival at the Château du Clos Lucé in Amboise, the elegant manor house that Francis I provided for his use, where he would spend the final 3 years of his life surrounded by his notebooks, drawings, and unfinished paintings, while continuing his investigations into the fundamental principles that govern both artistic beauty and natural phenomena. The chateau was connected to the royal palace by an underground tunnel, allowing the king to visit Leonardo frequently and to benefit from his wisdom and experience. Leonardo's final years in France were marked by a growing sense of the unity underlying all his diverse investigations, as he began to see the connections between his artistic techniques, his scientific observations, and his philosophical reflections on the nature of reality. His notebooks from this period reveal a mind that was still actively engaged with the great questions that had occupied him throughout his life, still seeking to understand the principles that would unify all human knowledge in a single comprehensive system. The paralysis that affected Leonardo's right hand during his final years forced him to rely increasingly on his assistants, particularly Francesco Melzi, who became not only his collaborator, but also his heir and the guardian of his intellectual legacy. Melzi's devotion to Leonardo and his careful preservation of the master's notebooks ensured that future generations would have access to the full range of Leonardo's investigations and insights. Picture Leonardo on his deathbed at Clos Lucé on May 2nd, 1519, surrounded by his faithful assistants and perhaps visited by King Francis I himself, as he prepared to leave behind a body of work that would inspire and challenge humanity for centuries to come. He was 67 years old, a man who had lived through one of the most creative periods in human history, and who had contributed more than any other individual to our understanding of the connections between art, science, and the natural world. Leonardo's death marked the end of an era in Renaissance culture, as he was perhaps the last individual who could credibly claim expertise in virtually every field of human knowledge, from painting and sculpture to anatomy and engineering, from mathematics and optics to philosophy and natural history. His legacy would inspire countless future generations of artists, scientists, and inventors who would build upon his insights and continue his quest to understand the fundamental principles that govern both human creativity and natural phenomena. As you rest in the deepest, most peaceful sleep, let Leonardo's story remind you that the greatest achievements of human civilization emerge from the marriage of artistic vision and scientific understanding, that curiosity and creativity are the highest expressions of human nature, and that the pursuit of beauty and truth are not separate endeavors, but different aspects of the same fundamental quest to understand our place in the magnificent complexity of the natural world. Sleep well, and may your dreams be filled with the wonder and beauty of a universe that reveals its secrets to those who approach it with Leonardo's combination of artistic sensitivity and scientific rigor.